Saquon Barkley was supposed to be out the next 3 weeks with a low ankle sprain. This team was really built on the back of Saquon Barkley carrying the offense, man.
I just don't know what this Giants offense looks like without him.
They're going to need players like Hyatt, like Darius Slayton, Isaiah Hodgins, Darren Waller to kind of sort of step up.
Look at the release.
There's your separation.
Great route.
Stutter and go. Gets by clean.
That is unbelievable.
May be the greatest catch I've ever seen.
Saquon Barkley, low ankle sprain. I'm like, all right, cool. So he has a chance. And then it was like, no, now he's out for the next 3 weeks. And I'm like, wait, what? I'm like, how bad was this ankle sprain, bro? Like the guy's walking around and stuff. Like I didn't think it was that bad, but apparently it's really, really bad. 3 weeks with an ankle sprain. That's tough.
Very tough, especially for an offense that hasn't really looked that good for 6 quarters of the season so far. Right. It's almost like the Cardinals woke up at halftime, like somebody came to Jonathan Gannon at halftime, like, hey, we're not supposed to be winning games this year. What are we doing here? Like, let's let the Giants come back in this one.
It's interesting to me, right? Because of all the contract issues, certainly that will be talked about during this 3-week layoff here for Saquon Barkley. We're going to find out which camp is right over the next 3 weeks, right? Or at least we'll think we know who is right over the next 3 weeks. And that's the thing, like, you know, these don't pay running back truthers or whatever. They're very entrenched. It doesn't even matter. But Breida and Brightwell could average, 0.7 yards a carry. It doesn't matter. Don't pay Saquon, right? Mm-hmm. And then on the other side, these old school football heads of just, you got to pay your good players. Which, by the way, I'm not an old school football head, but I do think, paying your good players is probably good. It's good. It's good for the team. It's good for team morale, to be honest with you, to pay your good players. So that's interesting. But over the next 3 weeks, though, Saquon is going to be out, and yeah, man, we're going to find out what this team is really made of, because last year, and Matt, I think you would agree with me, this team was really built on the back of Saquon Barkley carrying the offense, man.
Yeah, led the team in targets, and just that he's kind of that gravitational force for them.
Certainly, with all of the extra stuff that is happening around this whole running back situation, and in particular, Saquon Barkley and the Giants. Certainly some eyebrows are going to be raised, and certainly there's going to be a lot of talk, I'm sure, in New York markets about the validity of the injury and all those kind of things, man. But yeah, I'm really fascinated to see what happens. And I'll tell you what, Matt, I'm interested to see if they go a little bit more, maybe a little bit more up tempo. Maybe they go a little bit more vertical. Maybe they try to get a little crazy with their passing game. I mean, Jalen Hyatt only ran 11 routes last in this past game against the Cardinals. I could see his, stock on the rise here a little bit. 11 routes, 2 targets, 2 grabs, 89 yards. They're going to need players like Hyatt, like Darius Slayton, Isaiah Hodgins, Darren Waller to kind of sort of step up here.
Yeah, and I think they need Daniel Jones to step up as well, right? Like, that's the thing is, I think he played well in the second half. He just plays well when he can just kind of run, like, just cut it loose,
Right.
I think he does play. And that's why I think Jalen Hyatt will continue to be a really important player for this offense, because if you're going to cut it loose to somebody, why not cut it loose to the guy that can really rip you downfield, which is obviously Jalen Hyatt. So he's going to remain somebody that is sort of in the centerpiece there. Maybe they don't play him a full amount of routes because they just trust Darius Slayton more. They trust Isaiah Hodgins more. And I totally get that. And I understand that just based on Hyatt's like routes and his portfolio from his collegiate days. But again, I think he'll have to be an important part of this offense if they're just going to look for that next dimension without Saquon Barkley. Darius Slayton is an acceptable speed flanker. I think Isaiah Hodgins is an acceptable X receiver. I think Paris Campbell is an acceptable slot. Darren Waller, like, again, he should be a difference maker, but if he's not healthy, same thing we just talked about with Juju. If he's not healthy, like, that's just where he's at. And I think they're kind of in that boat. And I think if you have that player, if you have that setup, then you need a quarterback who's going to really move the needle, because as good as Mac Jones is, he's going to be a guy that can run and execute an adult offense. I think he's shown that. And I'm kind of like, I think Daniel Jones can do that same thing. And they just kind of need to let Daniel Jones like cut it loose, right? Because that's I think when he's playing his best.
You did a profile piece on Isaiah Hodgins. Very quickly, can I pick your brain on Hodgins? What does he bring to the table? 29 routes run, was the fourth most on the team on Sunday. 5 targets, 4 receptions, 40 yards, and a touchdown grab. This guy came through a little bit late in the season, showed some flashes. You charted him from his production last year rather. What did you find?
Yeah, I think last year he showed that he can play, right? Like what we just talked about, that he can be an acceptable, viable X receiver. We throw the Devontae Parker axis around an awful lot on this show, and that's why, because I think he is like, all right, if Devontae Parker is your X receiver, you're not a joke of an offense. You're not running out you're a joke of an offense if you're running out Matt Patricia as your coordinator, but that was a separate issue with the Patriots last year. So
right.
I think Hodgins kind of fits in that bucket, right? 67% success rate versus man. That's not an exciting number, but it's certainly solid. It's kind of right in the range of the league average. Showed pretty well against press. Only saw press on 8.6% of his routes, but did come in with a 77.8% success rate. That was probably, I would say, the best number from his reception perception sample. But
right.
I think he showed you a guy that has good hands, a guy that can run quality routes in the intermediate area. I also kind of thought some of his best stuff is when they'd have him run choice routes actually from the slot. Like I'm thinking about that playoff win against the Vikings, but just showed he's a guy that can play, but he's not a difference maker. He's not a superstar. He's just like a solid quality NFL player.
Yeah, interesting numbers on some of these routes. 80% success rate on the curl route, which I thought was pretty good, especially given the type of player that he is. 75% success rate on the post. That's pretty solid. 47% on the 9. That's a little bit below average, and then 40% on the corner, also pretty below average if you take a look at the rest of the NFL.
If we're looking at somebody that could just be reliable and look, they're going to need reliability with Saquon Barkley out of the mix, right. I think Isaiah Hodgins makes sense. And then hopefully you get enough splashy plays from the rest of these guys, especially like a Jalen Hyatt, of course, I think people are going to be really interested in, because he just so clearly, and this is the funny thing about Hyatt, right? He was labeled as like a first-round pick, and it's just like, oh, well, this guy's got so much room to go. Like, is he a first-round pick? Like, I don't know. If he just tops out at like Ted Ginn, that's the best-case scenario. Is that really worth a first-round pick? But it's so clear he can obviously play, right? Like he can play football. You don't do the stuff he did in college if you just absolutely can't play. So then he goes in the third round, and it's like, oh my God, this is great. Like now, if you get Ted Ginn in the third round, he has this long career of taking the top. That's great stuff. So that's the funny thing about Jalen Hyatt. It's just measuring those expectations, I think, will be key with him, especially early in his career. So I don't know. The Giants just have, they just leave a lot to be desired right now from an offensive perspective.
He's the only guy, Jalen Hyatt, that can potentially be a difference maker. He's certainly somebody that they're hoping can take the lid off of a defense. And even if it's just something as simple as clearing it out for guys like Slayton and Isaiah Hodgins to work in those intermediate areas of the field, which I believe is a good area of the field for them. And by the way, I love the intermediate area of the field. That's where you make your money in the NFL, right? So if Daniel Jones can start throwing those passes and getting those boys involved, and Jalen Hyatt every now and again, making a splash play over the top, let's go.